We must constantly look at things in a different way.
The Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast was created by two physical therapists out of the desire to learn more about the different educational roles in physical therapy and healthcare, and how healthcare education works by talking with educational leaders and people with different perspectives within physical therapy and across interdisciplinary lines on how education can be improved to disrupt the status quo of healthcare education. This is our journey, and thanks for listening. Are you a third-year physical therapy student that excels on tests when you have study guides, checklists, and deadlines? With all of the information available about how to prepare for the NPTE, it's easy to get disorganized and not feel prepared going into the big day. NPTE Prep Success is an online course that provides PT students easy-to-use study guides and step-by-step guidance through the NPTE preparation. To learn more, visit kylericeprep.com. Thank you again all for your continued support. And now for the show. Hello, everybody, and thanks for listening to another episode of the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm Brandon Powen. And of course, I'm joined by my fellow co-hosts, Stephanie Wyrock and F. Scott Fiel. And today we have the esteemed privilege to chat with Dr. Todd Davenport, who is a full professor and program director at the University of the Pacific DPT program in Stockton, California. He is also involved with the Academy of Prevention and Health Promotion Therapies, or the APHPT for short. And fun fact is Todd was actually our second interviewed guest on the HGT podcast almost a year ago. I think it was about around this time. And for those of you who haven't listened to that first interview, please check it out on iTunes, which is in the show notes, as it's a very powerful episode. And today our topic of discussion is going to be a little bit different than last time, as today it's going to revolve around DPT program modification for the future physical therapy clinician, educator, researcher, and even the advocator. So, Todd, before we dive into discussion, could you give our listeners an update on what you're up to now and how the new role of a program director has been going for you, man?
Yeah. Hey, thanks to all of you guys and to your listeners for the chance to be on again. It was great talking to you the first time around, and it's been really fun to see how the podcast has grown and how you brought some really cool people on to talk about some really interesting and provocative topics. So thanks again for the chance to be part of it. Being 1 year in, I've kind of started to see everything once, but that's not. I'm sure that's not going to be. It's not going to be enough. I'm going to be growing for a long time with this. So it's been going great. I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it in ways I didn't think I was going to. I like the idea of setting a culture for both students, but also through faculty in terms of setting up administrative programs and so forth. So it's been going great. So again, thanks for having me on and thanks for asking.
Todd, before we dive into program modifications, it may benefit our listeners to know about all the influences that currently affect DPT education, just to kind of get some perspective on the current status and barriers before we get into any type of solution. So what I want to do is we're going to name a few organizations or influencers, and feel free to add any that maybe we don't cover. And I just would really like to hear your perspective as a program director in the impact that each of these play on DPT education. So the first one that if we could have you address it would be CAPTI. How does that affect DPT education?
Yeah, so CAPTI is a really important organization from the perspective of program review and program accreditation. They're the committee that essentially decides whether you get to open your doors, sort of having met the minimum standards of an accredited physical therapy education program. So clearly they have a lot of influence. There was a recent revision in kind of the CAPTI foundations that we're kind of looking through in preparation for our own self-study that's coming up here in the next couple of years. And it's a lot of the things that we're looking at are just trying to make sure that we're putting forth policies and procedures that make sense, that our program makes sense, that we're following what we said what we're going to do, and that we're delivering on a good product in the way of a sound physical therapy education and also happy employed graduates.
All right, rapid fire. Next up, FSBPT. How does that affect your program?
So FSBPT is the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy. These are the groups that administer the laws governing physical therapist practice and physical therapy assistant practice. And the thing that's important to note with FSBPT is that they administer the National Physical Therapy Examination. And so the NPTE, of course, is an important, sort of benchmark, kind of summative assessment for how your graduates do in terms of being able to go out and be practice ready. And so programs are looking at what the FSBPT is doing, in particular related to the individual sort of law of the land for each state, kind of depending on your mission as a program. Maybe you're interested in sort of training practitioners to meet the needs of a specific state, such as if you're a faculty member in a state supported program. And just more broadly, programs are looking at the content of the NPTE. Not that we're necessarily teaching to the test. In fact, I think most of us would agree that we're really trying to teach above the test, because that NPTE is supposed to be, geared toward minimum standards for practice. But that, it gives us an opportunity to sort of understand how to help our graduates succeed and enter clinical practice.
That's a good point, Todd. And I kind of just got one little brief follow-up to that from your role as a program director dealing with FSBPT. Are there any sorts of pressures that programs get in terms of with licensing exams and such, just to kind of gain some perspective on where you guys are coming from and kind of what are the ramifications of the NPTE as a school status?
So no one comes down from the NPTE and essentially says, hey, thou shalt do this as a program. But I think everyone is sort of taking a look at how we can help our students succeed on the exam. And so, we're doing things like looking at content outlines, where we've started using the practice assessment and having our students complete that as part of the program, in terms of trying to help them get ready as part of their test prep, even while they're on their terminal clinical internships that we have them on right now. And so while the NPTE doesn't specifically come down and mandate any specific characteristics of programs or content that's taught in programs, clearly, we're going to take a look at the NPTE and make sure that the content that we're teaching lines up with, how our students are going to be tested. And then remembering that that's a minimum standard. And so that we're not teaching to that test because we don't want to teach to a minimum standard. We would prefer to teach to above that. We want excellent practice ready graduates who can easily clear that minimum hurdle.
Gotcha. All right. So rapid fire take number 3, the APTA. What is the APTA's role or influence on DPT education programs?
So the APTA is the mothership. It's American Physical Therapy Association. It's I believe the second largest physical therapy organization in the world. And that it's exactly that. It's an organization of physical therapists and physical therapy assistants. And so it deals with practice issues. It's a membership organization. So again, it's not necessarily an organization that will come to a program and say that, again, thou shalt do this or that, but may come up with good recommendations that keep us on the cutting edge of practice, and keep us on the cutting edge of research, and then also the kind of the cutting edge of advocacy. And so, again, the APTA is very important. We essentially mandate membership for our students in the APTA so that they have the experience of being members. That's not uncommon. A lot of programs are doing that now. And a lot of our faculty are sort of volunteer to be members of the APTA and serve in leadership roles.
How about ACAPT and the Academy of Physical Therapy Education? How does that affect DPT education?
So ACAPT is among those organizations, I think, relatively new. It's a component of the American Physical Therapy Association, and it essentially is the academic council or academic senate of physical therapy. And so each program that is a member of ACAPT is allocated, I think, a voting member. And so essentially this provides a forum. It's a little bit like the House of Delegates, I guess, is the best sort of analogy, but specifically related to education and educational issues. So again, ACAPT is not necessarily going to come to a program and say, thou shalt do this thou shalt not do that, but is extremely influential to some of the other organizations, like, for example, CAPTI, that the APTA, there's a lot of bleed over between APTA and ACAPT, a lot of bleed over between FSBPT and ACAPT. And so you see a lot of sort of synergies that occur, and that each of these bodies, just by virtue of how they're structured, may look at things a little bit different way.
All right. Well, speaking of the House and the Senate, what about state and national laws or organizations?
Definitely we pay a lot of attention to practice acts and federal regulations related to physical therapy practice. And so that's just sort of baked into what we do. I know that our program, and again, our program may not be unique in this regard, but we actually have representatives from our state board, the Physical Therapy Board of California, come out and talk to our students about, licensure and sort of what that means, and practice acts and how those practice acts are decided. We sort of organize our advocacy days around practice-related issues, advocating for patients, but also through the context of taking a look at what our practice privileges are here in the state of California. So it's always sort of comes back to what state and federal law allows you to do. I think that there's other sort of legalities that may not be sort of immediately obvious at the surface that we take a look at. The state authorization, sort of reciprocity agreements, is a big issue for us right now. We have out-of-state clinical internships. California is not currently a SARA state, and so we do a lot of contractual arrangements on our end as a program to make sure that our students have the best pick of their clinical internships, even out of state. So that would be one. FERPA is another one. The various different titles of sort of the educational acts are ones that we pay attention to in terms of disclosures. So we're constantly paying attention to not just laws, but also regulations, how those laws are constantly being interpreted and reinterpreted, so that we make sure that our program is as competitive, but also as transparent as possible in compliance with federal law.
Nice, Todd. And, I know we've mentioned quite a few organizations there, but, from your perspective, from your seat, are there any other influences or organizations that perhaps also contribute to DPT education programs that perhaps we hadn't mentioned?
There's probably plenty of them that contribute indirectly, and I'm not thinking of too many additional ones off the top of my head that would be of immediate sort of impact or interest to the listeners. But, I do want to point out that, under the APTA, that the sections are doing a lot of great work in terms of providing entry-level recommendations for entry-level content. And so that's something that we're paying a lot closer attention to in terms of curriculum roadmaps and that kind of thing. So that's certainly something that we're looking at. There are complementary organizations, ACSM, other sort of membership organizations that are sort of outside of physical therapy, but that are in the wheelhouse of movement and movement-related interventions that we're constantly paying attention to in the manner of trying to ensure that our curriculum is on the leading edge and that is as all-inclusive as possible related to kind of movement-related intervention and evaluation.
Yeah, Todd, no, that's very helpful. And it seems, especially seeing how there are so many different organizations and influences perhaps on the education process as well. I'm curious, from your perspective, what do you think are some of the pros and cons of kind of having so many distinct organizations having a role within education and how it is now?
It's a good question. And it's one that I'm sort of a both and thinker, but I sort of think about this as the way it is, that each of these organizations looks at things from a slightly different perspective and they have value. CAPTI, minimum standards for physical therapy education. The Federation of State Boards of PT essentially is the gateway to clinical practice through the exam. The APTA is very concentrated on professional issues in their totality. I mean, and you've seen the banter on social media that suggests just how big a swimming pool professional issues are for physical therapists and physical therapy assistants. ACAPT, again, is sort of a representative membership organization that functions like the House of Delegates and has regular order and can kind of bite off pieces of different issues and recommend structure. So we're looking at one example would be this issue of resilience that came up. And so now we're doing an entire subgroup a study group on resilience through ACAPT, and I'm really excited to find what that group has to say about it, and how do we help our students with resilience, however we decide to define that. State and national laws, I mean, those are just kind of baked into what we do, and they're ever changing. And again, adding regulations on top of that, trying to stay on top of how state and federal executive branch leaders are reinterpreting some of these rules surrounding education in general that may impact what we do as a department. So there's a lot of different a lot of different influences on the program. I don't know that there's pros and cons. Once you kind of are familiar with what each of these does and sort of what lever each of these organizations pulls, you kind of understand what piece of this they're bringing to the table. And I guess I would prefer to kind of think about that as being kind of all-inclusive. I know a lot of the discussions that we've had on social media around reforming education or thinking about, in particular, program costs and these sorts of things. Where do you take something like that? Do you take it to CAPTI? Do you take it to FSPPT? Do you take it to APTA? Do you take it to ACAPT? And the answer to that question is probably all of those. You really have multiple routes of entry, and it really kind of depends on your desired effect. Sort of what are you hoping to sort of get out of an initiative, and that's where you would take it. And so, the answer can be a little confusing, and it can seem like nobody cares because there are so many different organizations that don't seem like they're really doing much at any one particular time. But there's a lot that tends to happen under the surface in my experience with these organizations. And so that's something that's really important to keep in mind.
So Todd, I think that's really good to kind of gather a lot about how, like you said, all these different organizations kind of bring something unique to the table, and how, if there's an issue, it needs to be kind of brought up to all of them with that. So now I'm kind of curious, now that we've kind of gathered kind of all of the influences that are going on with this, and this question is more for those within academia. So in your opinion, what is the best way for DPT education on the whole? And of course, realizing that there are innovative and progressive programs out there doing great work, what is the best way for DPT education on the whole to evolve to meet the future needs of society, to really help best prepare students for the real world?
Yeah, that's the reason why I like being on this podcast, because that's an awesome question. And I'm going to try and answer it. I'm sure there are lots of right answers here. One of the things that we've been really interested in as a program since the time I've been here, and that predates me, has been this issue of concise education. That how long is long enough? How long is too long? And so I think that one of the things that I really think the academic world needs to start doing in order to meet the future needs of society is to really take a look at sort of what we're doing and how we're doing it with regard to program length. We've run a 25-month DPT program since, 2005 or 2006. So we're kind of hashtag DPT into OG. We've been doing this for a while, and we have a proven track record of outcomes. And so I really think that the major innovation is going to be these programs that are looking at their curricular models, realizing that maybe the kind of the 3-year template might not be the best for everyone, could be on the whole wasteful, and really be sort of looking at that. So we've actually done some of the finances related to this work, and hopefully we'll have an infographic set up here pretty soon. But what we found is that there are some cost advantages related to concise education, and so it's kind of easy to think about that. A shorter program would save you money, and that's intuitively obvious. But also think about the interest at repayment, in terms of when you enter repayment, that interest will capitalize. If you're hearing that for the first time, I'm sorry, but that's sort of a brutal fact of educational finance. And so to me, this is an issue that we really need to take seriously. And I think concise education is going to be a big factor. Again, I don't think it's going to be the best for everyone, just kind of depending on lifestyles, learning preferences, and so forth. There may be 3- and 4-year programs that move on. But I think that two-year model just sort of has the right fit. And I think that there's enough of a track record among the few that are doing it to be able to say that with some confidence.
So Todd, you mentioned a lot of the innovations that you're seeing is decreased length of programs. What are some examples of some innovative programs that currently exist? I know that you had mentioned that you guys do the 25-month program. Would you say that programs that are shorter are the innovative programs, or are there other innovations within DPT education as well that maybe our listeners aren't aware of?
I think your listeners are pretty savvy, and so they'll find stuff out before I do. But that the integration of technology into programs, of course, is quite innovative right now. It's kind of a hot topic. I'm aware of a couple of programs that have developed substantially online programs. That's pretty innovative. And so that's pretty cool. So I really think that these issues of concise curriculum, convenience can make for a more inclusive profession, which I think is really important to our mission of transforming society. I also think that it makes it for more of a livable profession for folks when they come out. And I think that that's increasingly going to be important as we move forward. This whole issue of sort of joy in medicine. I think we need to find the joy in physical therapy, and there's a lot of that. People got into it for a specific reason, and I think the opportunity to pursue concise programs that integrate technology in a strategic way for the benefit of the student are those that will help improve quality of life after graduation.
Yeah. So Todd, something that's come up multiple times on the show involves the cost, like we were talking about. And Brandon recently did a poll on Facebook and Twitter, just kind of asking, what is the one thing that people would want changed about their DPT education? Number one was cost. Number two was an updated curriculum. From your position in academia, could you give our listeners an insight about why DPT and frankly, college education in general is so expensive and continues to rise?
The answer is I'm not 100% sure. So what I can say is that every institution has their own model for how they run as a business. And so, different DPT programs contribute differently to each institution's financial model. And so it's important to remember that. So the other thing that's kind of important to remember, and kind of a lesson for me in some of these social media discussions, is programs don't set their own tuition. That's done at the administrative level. That's sort of vice president of finance stuff that has the approval of the president. And so it's really important to remember that your program doesn't set its own price, and often doesn't necessarily get all the feedback to be able to sort of talk about how that tuition price, that cost of attendance, might be affecting people after graduation. And so what a lot of institutions do is really, I think, look at their application pools. And look, this is market economics, right? So supply and demand. And so if you see your applications take a dip, one of the things you have to look at is your program costs. And maybe do something about program costs in order to make your application pool more robust. But if you have 10 applicants for each seat in your class, there's kind of no incentive, to be honest. And so, and I think the four of us know this, that there's more that needs to be sort of taken into consideration here. But I also think that it's really important to remember that, that your school is a business. And the school is going to run, in good faith, as good a faith as I think possible. But we'll sort of take a very sober look at sort of supply, at basic market dynamics, basic supply and demand.
So kind of with that being said, Todd, about kind of going through more about how, yes, it is a business, and realizing that, of course, the VP of finances from the administrative level is probably going to have more of a responsibility, or more responsible for kind of setting that range for what that tuition would be in that case. And you kind of mentioned this market economics, supply and demand. So, I'm really curious, because since, right now in PT, costs continue to go up to get into school, but salaries overall on the whole for PTs as just entry-level clinicians really overall seems to be staying about the same. One of my big concerns is, are we going to start to see a shift where less people are going to get into it? And then would we perhaps see more of the change in the cost and stuff? And I'm just curious, kind of, what are your thoughts on that whole situation?
Yeah, I mean, I hope not, because, you know, it makes for a less inclusive profession. And I think that's going to be really important for us to have as many voices, as many experiences at the table as possible in order for us to transform society. So that ultimately, you know, I think that this intersection between, you know, ability to pay off debt and the you know, ability and what schools are charging may end up jeopardizing the very sort of vision of our professional organization in the United States. And so what I'd like to see more, and I think is increasingly starting to happen, is that folks are starting to do some market surveys and some salary surveys, and to try and get an idea of what the quality of life and sort of the cost of being a physical therapist is, sort of upon repayment. And I think these things are happening. And that, frankly, I think that this is probably a role for ACAPT, probably a role for APTA to get more involved, because again, this really jeopardizes the mission. That it's a great mission, as you guys know. I subscribe to it, and I think we need to do it. But I don't think we're going to be able to do it if we don't have sort of a sustainable workforce. And I think it's going to take some more creative solutions than just, oh, we need to work on Aetna to pay us more. Because frankly, we've tried that since I've been a PT. So this has been 16 years. And we need to do something different. The payers aren't going to pay us more. We've tried that. And so, you know, where I would see is kind of take a look at, you know, what do PTs get paid? And then sort of what are their costs just associated with their education. This is not data that's a mystery. This is data that's you could easily calculate this. You could easily do salary surveys. And so I'd like to see more of that happen. And I know that there is some, you know, gathering momentum to make this happen. But yeah, it's a tough issue that I kind of see both sides of it. You know, like on the one hand, if you're a clinician, and you're the only clinician in town, you can kind of charge your price, and it's up to you to make that price fair. And how you make that price fair is open to some interpretation. I don't see what universities are doing as being unscrupulous. I think what universities are doing are university things, and that they require feedback. They require information, and I think we're in a position to do that if we will.
Yeah. So Todd, now that we're kind of on the finance bandwagon here, you know, another issue that's kind of come up is, you know, with the fact that more DPT programs are emerging, resulting in programs on the whole, on average, getting less government money due to the increased number of programs. And, you know, I'd love to know if you think, A, we need that many more DPT programs, and B, how does this affect the profession on a whole?
You know, I think that there's an issue here that we can kind of think about in terms of again, a careful market analysis. And so the careful market analysis that I think we need to do is really taking a look at local supply and demand for physical therapists, and really sort of focusing in on that. That's not something that necessarily I think has been a big part of accreditation, kind of initial accreditation for new programs. And I think it's becoming a bigger bar to be able to clear, is you have to actually show that what you're doing is training physical therapists in an area of need. You know, depending on your outlook and depending on what projections you're looking at, we're either, you know, needing, you know, umpteen thousand physical therapists until 2030, or we're just about to cap out the entire profession. And so kind of in between that confidence interval, which is really wide, we really kind of need to sort of take a really careful look at what we're doing. And again, I think looking at local demand is probably the best way to do that. You know, as for the issue of less government money, yeah, I mean, I haven't looked into that issue as much, and that's something that I probably should learn more about. And it is an issue, especially if that refers to student financial aid. So that's definitely something that needs to be looked at.
So Todd, with CAPT requiring that at least 50% of faculty at DPT programs have a terminal degree, like a PhD or a PhD, and the fact that DPT education costs do continue to rise, resulting in more financial strain on people looking to enter academia because they need that terminal degree. What are your thoughts on, A, is the terminal degree still valuable or not? And if so, who do you think should be getting it, and how is this heavily weighted? And then B, what are some ways that programs can integrate terminal degree tracks into their DPT programs to maybe improve access to this degree for people?
So you're going to get a healthy dose of bias here, because only about 14% of core faculty in DPT programs have their DPT as a terminal academic degree, and so you're getting a very minority view here. So I'm just going to warn you. I think that the terminal academic degree still has value. I think that I also think that it can't be the only way that someone can enter a career in academia anymore. I think that the terminal academic degree is great for developing very specific research skills. Is great for developing a very deep understanding of sort of a singular aspect within a discipline. I admire how people really devote themselves to understanding a methodology or understanding a specific area of science in order to achieve a terminal degree. I also don't necessarily see that the terminal degree prepares people well for things like university service. It doesn't necessarily teach you how to be a member of a university awards committee, which, because of faculty self-governance, you might be doing. It doesn't necessarily teach you how to chair a curriculum committee or put together a CAPTI report. So there's really important things that it doesn't necessarily do that really kind of comes forward with very purposeful mentorship. And I think that purposeful mentorship is possible with DPT with a person who has a DPT. I sort of developed my own scholarly accomplishments before I went back for my own post-professional master's degree. And so for me, it was a little bit less of an issue for starting my own scholarly work. I sort of had a scholarly history before going back to school. And so it's possible. I know that people are doing it. There are 14% of us that are doing it. How many of those folks are tenured? I have no idea. It's hard to say because the CAPTI data does not necessarily slice it. And so I think that, again, through purposeful mentorship of DPTs, an academic career is possible. And so, as for, integrating terminal degree tracks, there are ways that you could even step back and make scholarship by DPTs a really purposeful endeavor. I can't tell you how many folks I run into who did a project and they hated it. And they mainly hated it because it was a group project and it was about something that, either was already sort of well understood in science and sort of was just a class project. I use just a class project in air quotes. You can't really see my air quotes. And so people just don't get much out of it. So the question is, can we take what we're doing and make it more purposeful so that folks who really enjoy that kind of thing can get a good initial mentorship? Can we develop partnerships like the one that I had? I took advantage of at the NIH, where I was able to go do sort of a pre-doctoral fellowship at the NIH in clinical research. But can we make those more widespread? And so I think those could be really good ways to integrate not so much the terminal degree track, but the terminal degree idea for folks who are in DPT programs. Now, the reason that I focus so much on scholarship is that in my experience, again, just N of one, that's been a major barrier to promotion and tenure for clinicians. That the clinicians are very capable knowledge interpreters and appliers, applicators. Anyway, there's a word there, and I'm missing it. But it's different to generate your own scholarship. And so to me, that's sort of, I have some very strong opinions that I think tenure is a really important thing for clinically trained folks like me to be able to contribute to my university and have a platform to be able to contribute to my profession. And so I think that starts early. I think it starts in what we're doing. I think it starts in making things more purposeful. I think it has to do with creating partnerships, and those are things that I think we can do.
So I really like what you're talking about with a clinical research master's degree. I have a clinical research master's degree as well, Todd, and I did that in between my first and second years of PT school, which was very convenient because I was still in school at the time, and it kind of helped give me a new perspective going into my clinical rotations as a physical therapist. But I'm wondering, you do make a lot of good points as to some of these alternative paths that DPTs can take if they don't get this terminal degree. But I'm wondering, what are the barriers to these ideas that you're presenting? Are there any ways that we can overcome them? And what advice would you have to clinicians that maybe want to go along this path that you are describing, but maybe are having difficulty because of barriers?
So I think some of the barriers have to do with how institutions view the DPT. There are some institutions, many institutions probably, and I wouldn't be able to give you a number specifically, but my hunch is that many institutions don't see the DPT as a valid terminal academic degree. I just happen to work at an institution that does. And so the relevance to that is if you don't have the sort of a valid terminal academic degree at your institution, you can't compete for promotion and tenure. You can't compete for the things that would give you longevity, that would give you a platform to contribute at a university level, to be able to then have a conversation with administrators about the cost of PT education. If you're on a year-to-year contract as an adjunct, those just probably are not going to happen. It's a lot harder. So I think that's one barrier is, and that barrier may have to do with us in academia, that kind of, and how we perceive the DPT and in terms of its applicability within the academic setting. I think another barrier is, the formation of fellowships is complicated. Formation of degree programs is also a little harder. Again, you don't want to just sort of throw something out there that no one's going to be interested in or that is not a value add. And you can make an argument, I think, that our master's degrees do carry some weight, but not nearly the same amount of weight as a terminal academic degree. And so, thinking about a master's degree as a way to maybe circumvent the requirement for a terminal academic degree doesn't necessarily get us around how an institution might view our DPT. And so it kind of comes back to that. I think time, we're here. On one hand, I'm saying concise programs are innovative and cost saving. And on the other hand, I'm saying, we need to leave breadcrumbs of sort of scholarship, or advocacy or leadership, or teaching in our students. And so here again, it's the imagination and ability for programs to sort of think about what they're doing already, to take from best practices from other institutions, which may be market differentiators. And so, institutions might not be at liberty to share those things widely, and to be able to get those in the hands of students. So, I think that there are institutional barriers. I think that there are sort of broader issues at play. I think that having more, the irony here is that I think that having more DPTs interface with sort of higher level administrators and faculty promotion and tenure committees that may have some sway in terms of how the DPT is perceived in the academic setting is probably going to make the biggest difference. But it's getting people to those tables to have those conversations that is the hardest thing right now. I personally am not the only person doing this. I would never claim to be. I know of other folks who are DPTs that are who are tenured, who have administrative roles. And so I'm not going to pretend I'm the only one, but I would also like for there to be a trail that other people can follow, because right now there still isn't 16 years later. And I've chosen, sort of a specific path that might not work for everyone. And so there's the other side of that coin as well, that other folks might not choose that. And that's fine too. That everyone's experience kind of in getting into and within academia is different and should be unique and should be individualized. At the same time, I think that there needs to be a conduit to ensure that there are folks that are able to follow those of us who are doing it.
Yeah, Todd, as somebody who's pursuing his EDD, I kind of got into it because I wanted to teach, and I really wanted to, that's what I wanted my focus to be on, was being a good educator and teaching. And I think you see a lot of that with clinical educators as well. They just want to teach, but they want to teach in the clinic. So are you seeing any sort of incentives, or do you think that's even a viable option to have incentives for clinical education or for teachers who just want to teach?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. It really depends on what people want. And again, here's a role for the mothership and for ACAPT, to do a little bit of sort of workforce planning here. We collect this CAPT information. It's fantastic. And it would be good to maybe do a little bit deeper dive to find out sort of what are the workforce needs. What are the ambitions of folks who are in programs towards academic careers, and sort of what are they seeing as barriers from their perspective? Yeah, I think that we need to start listening to people more, because if you're doing a terminal academic degree to teach, it makes me sad, frankly, that we're doing this. Because if you want to teach cell biology, I would love for you to have a PhD. I'm not teaching cell biology, right? But if you want to teach clinical courses in orthopedics, in neurology, and so forth, I think a DPT should have a shot at that. If you're teaching clinically relevant applied sciences, if you're teaching, general medicine, diagnosis and screening, I think a DPT should have a shot at that. There's a lot of opportunity for folks who have clinical backgrounds as their terminal degree to be able to contribute here. And I just don't think we should be continuing to make the same mistake as costs continue to increase, to expect people to wear that cape, and be and sort of be perfect in every regard, that thou shalt have 2 terminal degrees in order to set foot in a classroom. Just doesn't seem right to me. And I can't think of another profession that does that as widely as we think that that's normal.
Yeah, no, Todd, I think that's really interesting, especially to kind of hear this discussion and this topic of faculty with terminal degree then versus just DPT. And, I realize my next question here is kind of out of left field here, and there may not be any evidence on this because it might be so new, but I don't know, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I'm just curious, is there any evidence of programs that have more DPT faculty compared to having more with terminal degrees? Is there any evidence that DPT-dominated faculty outcomes in a program are different compared to those with programs that perhaps have more faculty that have terminal degree?
Well, the short answer is no, none that I'm aware. And of course, because you're getting an extremely biased view from the 14% here, I've looked. So for me, the important thing that you just said was that we need to use data to make decisions. And right now, it seems as though CAPT sort of has, again, this kind of 50% rule. It seems to be based on this thought that some mix is important, and that I'm not sure where the 50% came from. So yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head in that I've always thought that we need to think about education like an intervention. And that if we believe that evidence-based practice is important from the perspective of patient management in physical therapy, that evidence-based practice in the educational arena should also be important. And so that we should be using data to make these decisions about what an optimal faculty mix looks like, and how much variation around the mean is permissible or even desirable in terms of how programs are set up and how programs are sort of executed. So to me, it's sort of an issue of we need to adhere to the same expectations of using evidence in practice that we would hold for our practicing clinicians and for our students.
Yeah, those are some great points, Todd. And I can't thank you enough for your time and for coming on to the show tonight. But I know you're familiar already with our final question, which is, if you could change one aspect of healthcare education, which aspect would you change and how would you change it? And for our first interview with you, your response was to break down the silos in higher education and improve diversity in healthcare education. We're giving you another at-bat at this, my friend. What else? What is another aspect of healthcare education that you'd like to see changed, and how would you go about changing it?
But I have a hard time beating my first one. Seeing it in writing was kind of cool. I wasn't sure what you guys were getting out of that ramble, but I'm glad you got that. So I would say that our last sort of topic sets up probably where I think we need to go, and that's to use data. We need to get really curious about sort of a scholarship of teaching and learning in our profession, and we need to not hesitate to use that information to use it to design programs, use it to identify whether different career training tracks are effective for desired outcomes. I'm thinking residencies and fellowships. I know that's been a topic that you've discussed. I'm thinking the effectiveness of educators in DPT programs. I'm thinking what is scholarship, what is acceptable scholarship, and how do we express that in a variety of folks with different terminal degrees. And so to me, it's this issue of using data, of collecting it, but also to not be afraid to use it, and to develop a framework, processes, people within the alphabet soup of organizations that have input into physical therapy education to be able to use that data in a meaningful way to impact students, impact the professoriate, but also ultimately impact the health and well-being of our public.
Well, thanks again for joining us, Todd. And our last wrap-up question is, where can people find you online and on social media?
So you can find me oversharing on Twitter. I'm at Suns Opening Band. You can maybe scroll back the 26,000 tweets or whatever. And
I was going to say, Todd, I actually tried to do that, and that is ridiculous, my friend. I did not get the #1 tweet. So if you're willing to share, we'd love to hear the story on that Twitter handle.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would like to say that Todd's Twitter account is one of the more entertaining physical therapy Twitter accounts that I love to kind of scroll through every so often.
Yep.
I appreciate that. It's sort of brain dropping stuff. So thank you for finding some value in that. So here's where it comes from. I'm a giant Pearl Jam fan. I've sort of squatted on the hashtag grunge PT, which is silly because really the whole issue of grunge is kind of, I won't get into it because I'll just bore everyone. So Suns Opening Band is after a Pearl Jam lyric. So it's kind of a lesser known Pearl Jam song called Push Me, Pull Me, which is really spoken word. And there's a lyric in it, and I'll see if I can get this right. The lyric is at the bridge is something like a cloud dropping rain, I'm discarding all thought, I'll dry up, leaving puddles on the ground. I'm like an opening band for the sun. And so this is my Twitter habit, dropping rain like puddles on the ground. And so there you go.
I love it.
That makes so much more sense now. Again, this has been an amazing part 2 follow-up to kind of our original interview and such. This interview has been fantastic, as I've definitely learned an insight on some of the some things that I really had not really thought about or really even had insight on. So I think that's definitely going to be very valuable to the listeners. And, Todd, again, thanks so much for all your help throughout our journey, for that matter, and for all that you do for the students in education. It's truly an honor to have you on.
Well, thank you. It's been really fun to talk with you guys again and again to see how things have grown and keep killing it. You guys are doing great.
Access to healthcare is one of the largest issues facing both providers and patients, as millions of people worldwide lack timely and affordable access to healthcare. Anywhere Healthcare, a telehealth platform, is a simple, low-cost option for providers and patients that eliminates the barriers to access to all kinds of healthcare. To find out more, check out anywhere.healthcare, which is available on our show notes. And if you use the code HET in all caps when you email to sign up, you'll save 25% off the total cost. Thank you for attending class today, and we hope that you learned something and gained value from the content.
If you'd like to schedule office hours with us, feel free to add us on Twitter at HET Podcast, on Instagram, HET Podcast, on Facebook, the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast, and the homepage, healthcareeducationtransformationpodcast.com.
And for those of you following along in the syllabus, extra credit can be obtained by liking us, sharing us, and leaving a review.
Let's continue our journey up Mount Educational Success as lifelong learners.